So previously in our Five Nights at Freddy's character concept series, we've been looking into what could possibly be in the new game, Secret of the Mimic. So far we've covered some potential characters and their backstories at the Fall Fest circus. But now that we've met these characters, there's still one question that remains. Where exactly did these circus animatronics come from? They weren't built on the circus grounds, so they had to be sent from somewhere. Well, lucky for us, some brand new info for Secret of the Mimic has just been released. So at this year's PAX conference, Steelball Studios set up an awesome looking FNAF booth. And the most exciting of all from that booth was the playable demo for the Secret of the Mimic. So the info from this new demo tells us that Secret of the Mimic will be set in a factory. It seems that this factory is manufacturing all the animatronics and attractions for the circus. We can see from the display monitors that there's multiple different areas to explore in the factory. What's even cooler is we finally get a good look at the Mimic Clown. Apparently their name is Jackie, which is pretty funny when you look back at one of our old videos from the past. So with all this new info, we're going to shift gears from the circus for the time being and explore this new factory setting and its characters. Speaking of, let's meet our first character now. So this character is simply known as the Elephant. The Elephant is a familiar character that we've seen before. We've seen him in the secret area of the Ruin DLC. And now it's been confirmed that he is in fact in the demo and he might be a character in Secret of the Mimic. So at this moment in time, this mascot character wasn't given an official name, so he was just known as the Elephant. He was one of the many characters that was being manufactured for the upcoming circus. This factory was in charge of building each and every character and attraction. For his design, he was given a clown outfit with a green and white pattern, bright red shoes, and a matching hat. His face is also clown/circus themed with his red cheeks and little white eyebrows. Like we've mentioned before in our Secret of the Mimic concept videos so far, it looks like these characters are just material mascot suits that are fitted over an endo. We know that these specific characters are just suits due to the Mimic wearing the lion in the end of Ruin. So the Elephant was one of the first characters that was designed for the circus. But seeing as the workers have yet to make all the other characters, it would be some time before the Elephant would be at the circus. But this didn't mean that he would be stored away in an old dusty storage room. In fact, he was actually activated and was allowed to roam around the factory. The workers did this mainly because the extra movement would help loosen up all the joints and gears in his new endoskeleton. But also the added bonus would be that the Elephant would double up as an extra worker. He'd be able to help out around the factory and complete multiple odd jobs. The workers mainly used him for lifting boxes and other heavy objects. No matter what the job was, the Elephant was always happy to help out. But there was one instance where lending a helping hand didn't end so well for the poor Elephant. So in any workplace, accidents and mistakes are bound to happen, and the factory allowing the animatronics to help would definitely be one of their first mistakes. Whilst lifting heavy crates and boxes, the Elephant accidentally moved the wrong crate, and all of a sudden, they all came crashing down on top of him. The workers rushed over to help, but there really wasn't much they could do. They had to remove one crate at a time before they could free the Elephant, but when they were finished, the damage was already done. His body had been severely damaged and his appearance was withered and worn. The factory deemed him unfit to remain helping out around the factory, so they decided to store him away until they could fix him. But seeing as this was a factory that manufactured animatronics, they could just as easily replace him with another endo. And that's exactly what the factory decided to do. They would tear off his material skin and place it over another endoskeleton. The old damaged endo that was originally the Elephant would then be discarded into the shredder. But if that were to happen to the poor Elephant, then it wouldn't really be him anymore. Simply put, another endo would be occupying his material body. Surely he wasn't just an expendable product that could be replaced. He thought that he mattered a little more than that, especially with all the help and work that he's done around the factory. Well, he wasn't just going to stand around and let these workers discard his body. If anyone were to get too close to him, then he'd attack them on sight. In order to protect himself, the elephant saw everyone as a threat. It got to the point where no one could get anywhere near him, so the factory eventually abandoned the idea of replacing his endo. But the elephant wasn't convinced. If he lets his guard down for even a moment, then he'd be discarded and destroyed. So it was all in the workers' best interest to steer clear of the elephant. But unfortunately, one of the workers would get a little too close. So now let's get into the gameplay segment of the video. This time the player would take on the role of one of the factory workers. The factory was closed for the day and they were the only one left. They would need to shut down all the machines manually and then lock up the factory for the night. But these end of day tasks wouldn't be so easy. With the elephant roaming around, they'd need to be extra careful not to run into him. This crazed elephant was convinced that the player was out to get them, but really all the worker wants to do is shut down the machines and head home. So whilst roaming around the factory, they would need to complete these tasks. Each machine would require a certain sequence in order to shut them down, but multiple times they'd run into the elephant. Whenever this happens, the player would need to run and hide. They could either hide in lockers, boxes, or waste bins. Once they've lost the elephant, then they can continue their tasks. Each of these tasks would be a different QuickTime event where the player would have to pay attention. But this would add a layer of stress knowing that the elephant is out there searching for them. If they fail one of these QuickTime events, then the loud sound of the machine backfiring would lure in the elephant to their position. This would need to be a balancing act of caution and focus, because if they screw this up, then they'd be met with a deadly jump scare. Let's meet the next characters now. So the next characters that we'll be looking into are known as the Balloon Buddies. The Balloon Buddy crew consists of 4 members. We have Balloon Freddy, Balloon Bonnie, Balloon Chica, and Balloon Foxy. Each of these cute and cuddly characters is sporting a colourful striped shirt, a fun propeller hat, and their own balloon. These characters were simply just miniature versions of their circus characters. They were considerably smaller and a whole lot cuter. So the Balloon Buddies were quite the special characters that were being developed for the circus. Their main purpose wasn't just to be miniature animatronics. There were only 4 real animatronics that were designed to be mascots and roam around the park. The multiple other versions were designed to be toys that could be won as prizes. The Balloon Buddies are the main prizes that the visitors could win. Of course, the animatronic versions weren't up for grabs, but seeing the real moving mascots around the circus would make them want to win a cute toy version of the Buddies even more. So of course the animatronic versions were manufactured first, then came the production of all the toys. The size difference wasn't that drastic. All in all, these would be some pretty large toys. So just like all the other animatronics, the Balloon Buddies were allowed to walk freely around the factory. They too would help out however they could. But due to their small size, they really couldn't do much. They were mainly just seen as cute mascots that made all the workers smile. For the most part, the Balloon Buddies were no trouble at all. But there was one little problem that would eventually prove to be quite serious. So, oddly enough, the Balloon Bunnies were very protective and obsessed with their individual balloons. As long as they all had their balloons at all times, then everything would be okay. But if they were left without their balloons for an extended period of time, then the situation could get quite serious. In the past, if these animatronics didn't have their balloons, then they can show high levels of aggression. As to why this happens is unknown to the workers. All they do know is that they need to have a supply of replacement balloons at the ready. Without their balloons, the buddies start to change. They once had a close call, but luckily they got them their balloons. As long as they have these reserve balloons on hand, then everything should be okay. But why don't the workers just give them a balloon that won't pop? Surely a stronger material would work, right? Well, the workers tried this once, and needless to say, they would never try it again. not much is known about the false balloon incident. In classic company fashion, the factory covered up the incident and swept it all under the rug. Anyone who knew about what happened or the balloon buddies' behaviour was promptly fired and made to be silent. All that the remaining workers know is that it's company policy for the buddies to always have a balloon in their hand. They never questioned why, they just followed orders. But on a certain day, one of the workers wasn't informed about this rule. The buddies' balloons all popped and the worker thought nothing of it. They just shut down the factory for the night and went home. But all throughout the night, the balloon buddies were left without their precious balloons. As the hours went by, they all started to change. The first one to crack was Balloon Foxy. Next after that was Balloon Chica, then Balloon Bonnie, and lastly Balloon Freddy. These once cute cuddly animatronics were now a shadow of their former selves. When the workers returned in the morning, chaos ensued. Although some of the workers were injured, they managed to lock the balloon buddies away in a secure room. Under no circumstances were any of the workers to open this door. And for the most part, this rule was obeyed, because it wasn't a worker who opened the door. In his paranoia and fear of all the other workers, the elephant needed the balloon buddies to help keep the workers at bay. If they were all too focused on these little critters, then surely they'd leave him alone. So now with the balloon buddies on the loose, our factory worker character has yet another problem to deal with. So now, let's get into the gameplay segment of the video. The player needs to make sure that the balloon buddies are back inside the room before the night is over, but each character would also be stalking them as well. The way in which they were going to get them back into the room would be by luring them in with new balloons. If the player is able to blow up 4 balloons and place them in the room, then the balloon buddies would rush inside. But if any of these balloons pop in the process, then they would need to refill them again. They would need to get one of each of the corresponding colours that each of the characters liked the most. But during this task, they would have to look out for the elephant and each of these balloon buddies. The most active buddy who would appear the most would be Balloon Bonnie. Then, next most frequent would be Balloon Chica. Balloon Foxy would be the fastest character, and Balloon Freddy would be the best at hiding. If the player isn't careful, they could almost miss him hiding in the shadows. The player has to be careful and keep an eye out for these tricky little buddies, because if they don't, then the last thing they'll ever see is a surprise jump scare. So the next character we're introducing is Opal, the octo-jester. So, hence the name, Opal was designed to be a fun octopus jester. In total, she would have 8 tentacles. 6 of them would be used as arms, and the other 2 would be her legs. With this many arms, there would be a bunch of tricks that Opal could do. For instance, she would be a great juggler and would juggle multiple different items at once. She could also make lots of fun and interesting shapes with her many arms. For her design, Opal was given clown makeup and a traditional jester hat. Opal was by far the most complicated animatronic that the factory has produced. All her arms have free movement, so each one needed its own motor and servo. Opal's endoskeleton definitely looked intricate to say the least. She was made of multiple interlocking pieces and used the most parts out of any of the animatronics from this factory. So with all these tentacle arms, Opal proved to be quite helpful around the factory. She was mainly used for sorting out stray objects on the conveyor belts. If anything was out of order or defective, Opal's many arms could sort through them in an instant. She was always happy to lend a hand or 6. The factory was certain that Opal would be a smash hit once she was delivered to the circus. She was quite the favourite mascot here at the factory, and that would only mean that everyone at this circus would like her even more. The workers were quite proud of the final design that they achieved, and they can't wait to show off Opal the octo-jester in all her glory. But unfortunately, she would never be seen by the public. In fact, she never got to leave the factory altogether. Due to a tragic accident, she would never be her jolly self again. After what happened, everything seemed to go downhill from there. So what exactly happened to Opal? Well, it was just an ordinary day like any other. Opal was sorting out through the random bits and bobs and making sure no defective parts made it through. But with her many moving arms sorting away so fast, one of them got caught in the conveyor belt. This dragged poor Opal down into the heavy machinery. She was caught in the multiple gears and compartments. The workers all tried desperately to free her. They had to free one tentacle at a time in order to get her out. But in the end, Opal was looking like a mangled mess. All the material was stripped away from her face and head, and her tentacles were all ripped and torn, revealing her metal endo limbs underneath. Everyone at the factory was heartbroken when they heard about this tragic accident. Opal was such a favourite amongst them all, but now they could barely stand the sight of her. They didn't want to be anywhere near her when she looked so frightening. Whenever she tried to perform a juggling act and cheer up the workers, they would all run away from her out of fear. With no one at the factory wanting to see her anymore, it started to affect Opal very much. She was no longer the favourite here at the factory, all because of how she looked. As time went on, Opal started to resent the workers. If they didn't want to see her horrific body, then they wouldn't see her anymore. None of them could ever understand how she felt. Once she was beloved by all, and now she has become an outcast. Well, maybe it's about time they all understood what it was like. The next worker she laid eyes on would suffer the same tragic fate. She'd cram their body into the heavy machinery and mangle them just like her, and they'd finally understand what it was like. Suddenly, moments later, the worker entered the room to grab some supplies, and there and then, Opal found her victim that she would punish. Since they were the very next person that she saw, the decision was final. Now she'll stop at nothing to show the worker how it truly feels. Even though they didn't do anything wrong, Opal didn't care. Her mind was made up and there was no changing it. So now, let's get to the gameplay segment of the video. The worker finds themselves once again having to shut down the machines at the end of the day. They didn't meet their quota today, so they have to stay back a little while after hours. But now they were done, they have to make sure that the factory floor was shut down. After everything was done, they noticed one machine was still running. It was the main conveyor belt. They could have sworn they had already shut this thing off. Oh well, regardless, they need to switch it off. All of a sudden, Opal leaps out at the player. She almost grabbed them, but just missed. The worker quickly gets away from this deranged octopus. They need to make a break for the exit before Opal gets a hold of them. But it seems like she's already tightly locked the doors. They weren't getting out of here until they cut these doors open. So the worker needs to search around the factory for a pair of bolt cutters. They know there's a pair around here somewhere. They just need to search high and low and find it before Opal finds them. So in this gameplay segment, the player will need to run around and find the bolt cutters. But this won't be easy, seeing that Opal will always be chasing them. She'll always be moving and making her way towards the player's position. The player can try to lose her or even block her path. This would slow her down, but she would only find an alternative route and continue her chase. Eventually, after searching all around the factory, the worker has located the bolt cutters. Now they just need to head back to the exit and cut the chain. But they need to be careful, because Opal's movements would become much faster in this final stretch. And if the player isn't careful, the only thing they'd find is a deadly jump scare. So the next character we're introducing is Barkley the Clown. Hence the name, Barkley is a dog clown character. He's quite the friendly looking clown, and his personality matches up as well. Barkley is always in a happy and friendly mood. His design and appearance was also reflective of this mood as well. His bright green and yellow colour scheme with his big red shoes made him very approachable. Everyone at the factory loved giving Barkley a big hug and petting him on the head. As far as everyone was concerned, he was definitely a good boy. He'd always be there to brighten up everyone's day and make them happy. When he wasn't making people smile, he was doing a very special job at the factory. And this job was tennis ball management. It was Barkley's job to make sure that this tennis ball on a rope was always swinging. It was an incredibly important job and extremely vital to the factory's overall operation. Now obviously, this was of course a fake job. The workers only made Barkley do this to keep him busy throughout the day. He's tried helping before, but he would get distracted way too easily. Most of the time, he would just get in the way and cause delays. So the tennis ball management was the pretend job they assigned him. Barkley was happy to be involved and never complained. Everyone was quite fond of his happy attitude, and eventually he would prove to everyone that he was much more than a happy face. So on that day, everything was running along as usual. The endos were being built, the toys were being painted, and Barkley was chasing his tennis ball. But later on in the day, an unforeseen accident would occur. When stacking one of the shelves, it gave way and collapsed. But luckily, at the last second, Barkley was there to catch the falling debris. He saved one of the factory workers from being crushed by the collapsing shelf. But unfortunately, Barkley sustained quite a bit of damage from catching all the rubble. But in the end, he was just happy that this worker was safe. It didn't matter if his body was a little roughed up, at least he did a good thing and was still a good boy. The factory planned to have him fixed up and repaired soon. An animatronic like Barkley was quite rare to come by, so they thought fixing him would be the best option. Unfortunately, he would have to stay in the storage room where it was safe, but he didn't mind because he had his trusty tennis ball with him to keep him busy. But little did Barkley know he would become a hero once again. He'd be saving the late-night factory worker from certain danger without even realising it. So, night after night, the factory worker has to endure the attacks from the withered animatronics. It seems like each night they're getting more and more difficult to avoid. The elephant was being more aggressive than ever, the balloon buddies would run around and appear more frequently, and Opal would stop at nothing to cram them into the conveyor belt machine. If anything else would try to attack them, they weren't sure if they were going to make it out alive this time. But fortunately, an unlikely hero would come to their rescue. So one night, as they were preparing to shut down the factory for the day, the worker didn't realise the elephant was right behind them. Just before the elephant could grab them, a stray tennis ball flew right past. Moments later, Barkley rushed over and charged into the elephant. He knocked him out of the way, and this gave the worker a short moment to escape. It seems like Barkley had knocked his tennis ball off its rope, and he had to chase after it. This interaction gave the worker an idea. Maybe they could use Barkley and his tennis ball to their advantage. So now, let's get into the gameplay segment of the video. This time around, the factory worker has a new trick up their sleeve. They got their hands on the tennis ball and plan to use it when they're in danger. All they would need to do is squeak the ball and Barkley would come running. Any enemies that were in the vicinity would get knocked over by Barkley running towards the ball. But the player couldn't do this every time. Due to the damage that Barkley sustained, he'd have a cooldown period after every time he runs. He would just need a moment to regain his energy and he'd be ready to run once again. So this new ability would definitely come in handy, especially if a character like Opal or the elephant is blocking the player's path. So the player goes about their night and does all their tasks. They can rely on Barkley to help them out whenever he can. But the more they use this tennis ball ability, the longer it would take for Barkley to cool down. It would get to a point where they'd be waiting so long for it to recharge they wouldn't bother using it anymore for that night. So this would mean they would need to use this ability sparingly and only if they really needed it, because sticking to this strategy would ensure they get out of here in one piece. And with a friend like Barkley close by their side, that would be a real possibility. But all of these circus characters aren't the only animatronics here. In fact, there were actually a number of dedicated animatronics that worked here at the factory, and one character in particular was quite an interesting case. They weren't anything special, but they had their purpose and a job to do. So let's meet this hard-working character now. So the character we're introducing is known as Shredderbot. Shredderbot is an animatronic worker here at the factory. His one and only purpose is shredding papers and documents. His body was built similar to the other endoskeletons, but he had some other features. His main feature being his inbuilt shredder. With this shredder, he could shred and destroy multiple different items and objects. So that's pretty much all Shredderbot does. He has one job and he does it to the best of his abilities. So why are we covering this specific character? There doesn't seem to be anything quite important about this workerbot. And for the most part, that's true. He's just a worker and that's pretty much it. But that's not the reason why his case is being looked into. The most interesting detail is the specific incident that happened to the Shredderbot. So, not much is known about this specific incident. All we do know is the Shredderbot underwent a drastic change. Mysteriously, out of the blue, Shredderbot disappeared. The workers couldn't find him anywhere and had no idea what happened. The late-night factory worker remembers shutting down for the night and locking up the factory. And then, by the morning, Shredderbot was gone. To this day, it remains a mystery as to where he vanished off to. But a few days later, some strange instances started to appear. The workers began to notice a number of damaged endoskeletons had been scattered around the factory. They were in pretty bad shape and beyond repair. From the looks of the damage, it almost looks like these endos have been shredded. But how could that be? There wasn't any machinery that could really shred metal like this. After a few more days, more of the damaged endos started turning up. They were scattered and thrown all over the place. As far as anyone could guess, none of the workers had a clue as to what was happening. They were all getting concerned and wanted to get to the bottom of this mystery. So, one of the morning shift workers volunteered to stay the night and record some footage. They were sure if they filmed the factory overnight, then they could catch whoever it was in the act. So, as night fell and the factory was locked up, this brave volunteer started to walk around the factory and film whatever they could. They weren't sure what they would catch on film, but they were determined to uncover the truth. So this is what's causing all the trouble. Is that Shredderbot? It can't be. Its body is far too large. It's almost like it's an amalgamation of Shredderbot and the other endos. Whatever this thing is, it must be stopped. The player has located the morning worker's camera and they can see everything. Unfortunately, they now know what happened to the morning worker and seen their untimely end. At this moment, they're the only one who knows what's happened. And if it isn't stopped, it'll tear this factory apart. So the player needs to come up with a plan. They'll try and trap it and hopefully destroy this thing. So their plan is as follows. They'd take a bunch of endos from the assembly line and pile them up in the middle of the factory. Hopefully this would lure this monstrosity out into the open, and that's when the player would put their plan into motion. So once the bait has been set, now all that's left to do is wait. And it didn't take long for Shredderbot to show himself. He went straight for the endos and started shredding away. Now is the player's chance to spring the trap. Moments later, they pull a lever and a net falls down over Shredderbot. It wraps around and ensnares this terrible monstrosity. They've done it. They captured this rogue Shredderbot, and now all that's left to do is shut down. All of a sudden, Shredderbot extended blades all over his body and sliced through the net. He then charges straight towards the player. He knocks them over and pins them to the ground. With nowhere else to go, it looks like this might be the end for our protagonist. Just before they meet their end, they close their eyes. But nothing happens. They open their eyes and see that Barkley has come to their rescue. He's jammed his hands into the shredder in order to save the player. With one last-ditch effort, Barkley leaps with the Shredderbot through a wall. They both crash through the wall and fall down into the lower depths of the factory. As if this was all over was still a mystery. Hopefully Barkley was still okay and the Shredderbot was taken care of. But the player can't know for sure. This brave animatronic has saved their life multiple times now. The player can't thank him enough. Truth be told, they don't know why Barkley kept saving all the workers at the factory. Maybe it was in his programming. Or maybe it was just truly in his nature. The worker needs to return the favour and go save Barkley. But who knows what could be lurking down in the depths of the factory? The player wasn't sure. But they need to be brave like Barkley. Hopefully he'd be in one piece and Shredderbot would be no more. But as to if that will be the case, there's only one way to find out. Previously in our Five Nights at Freddy's character concept series, we've been looking into the mysterious factory that makes all the circus characters. So far everything has gone horribly wrong, and each and every one of the characters has suffered a terrible fate and now have it out for the factory worker character. All except one friendly animatronic named Barkley. Multiple times now, Barkley has saved the player from certain danger. The last time he saved them was from the rogue animatronic named Shredderbot. This deranged monstrosity tried to shred the player to pieces, but Barkley saved them at the last second. Now, both of these characters have fallen into the dark depths of the factory. There's no telling what's down there, and if Barkley has survived. The worker only sees it fair that they return the favour and save Barkley just like he's done for them. So now they prepare themselves and venture down into the ominous underground area. Who knows what they'll find down there? Hopefully it wasn't any more danger that would be in their way. But our protagonist could only be so lucky, because little did they know what they would find lurking down here would be the truth. So the worker continues to walk around the dark underground in search of Barkley. So far they found nothing. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing. All they could hope is that they don't find Shredderbot lurking down here. But as they venture forward, their worst fear comes true. There he is, the Shredderbot. Luckily, it looks like he was non-functional, but the player doesn't want to risk getting too close. As they inspect the lifeless Shredderbot, suddenly he springs back to life. His body twitches and spasms on the spot, but before he can fully regain his consciousness, a mystery hand slams down on his head. The hand clutches him tightly and drags his body into the darkness. Then, suddenly, all the player hears is a loud metallic crunch. Shredderbot's head gets tossed from the darkness and lands in front of the player. What on earth could have done this? Whatever it is, the worker doesn't want to stick around to find out. They need to find Barkley before it's too late. So without hesitation, they continue their search. Where on earth could he be? It's almost like this underground area goes on forever. Wherever he was, they hoped he was safe. Eventually, after searching around, they find someone lurking in the darkness. Maybe it was Barkley. As they approach them and shine their light, it turns out they were dead wrong. After a while, our main protagonist starts to open their eyes. They've got no idea what happened or where they are. All they know is that they're tied to a chair in a dark, strange room. Suddenly, a mysterious character lowers themselves from the ceiling. But the worker doesn't recognize this character. Come to think of it, they've never met this animatronic. They appear to be a strange-looking clown that is missing their lower half. The strange clown just hangs from the ceiling and stares at the worker. And then, a moment later, this mysterious character slinks back into the ceiling. What has this deranged-looking clown got planned for the player? They need to get out of here before they come back and it's too late. The player starts to look around this room and see what they can use to escape. And wouldn't you know it, they find a familiar face right behind them. It was Barkley. He seems to be in pretty bad shape. Both of his hands have been shredded off when he saved them from Shredderbot. At the moment, it looks like he's been powered down, but even in this state, he can still help the player. If they wobble their chair over to his sharp, jagged hands, then they can cut themselves free. So, inch by inch, the player manages to move closer to Barkley. They cut themselves free, and now both of them need to get out of here before the clown comes back. Barkley just needs a jolt of energy and he should be good to move around. But as the player searches around this room, they find something quite interesting. It turns out her name was Jackie, and she used to be a sort of Jack-in-the-Box character. Somehow she tore herself free from the box and escaped underground. But why hasn't the worker heard of her before? Surely there was some reason she was locked away underground. Well, it turns out it was for good reason. Multiple photos showed Jackie at the scene of every incident. She was the reason why all the crates fell on top of the elephant. She was the one who popped all the Balloon Buddies' balloons. She was the reason why Opal got stuck in the conveyor belt, why the shelf collapsed on Barkley, and she was the one who mutated the Shredder bot. Everything that was going wrong at the factory was because of Jackie. The player needs to get out of here alive to expose the truth. They need to tell the other workers so Jackie can be stopped for good. The worker finds an outlet plug and jolts Barkley back to life. The player just needs to remember the way back and they'd be free. But moments later, that's when they saw Jackie standing behind them. She's returned once again and isn't happy the player has broken free. She charges after them and now the chase is on. So in this gameplay segment, the player and Barkley would need to desperately run back to the surface. As they run through all the dark corridors, Jackie would be close behind them. This was her factory, she called the shots and was in full control. And she wasn't about to let this lowly worker ruin everything she's built. No matter how fast Barkley and the worker run, it seems like Jackie was still hot on their tail. But finally they make it back to the surface level of the factory. And there, waiting for the player, was all the other animatronics. They had Barkley and the player trapped and it looks like there's no escape. But at the last second, the player throws down all the photos at their feet. Scattered before them is all the evidence of Jackie's wrongdoing towards them. It doesn't take long for all the characters to realise who their true enemy is. They all turn their attention to Jackie and start moving towards her. Jackie is suddenly overwhelmed by all the characters advancing her way. They suddenly all attack her as they push her back down into the depths of the factory. Finally, all the characters have closure on who their true enemy was. It wasn't the workers at the factory at all. It was that twisted Jackie who was pulling the strings behind the scenes all along. Finally, it seems that this whole ordeal is over. Barkley was finally safe and the others got the sweet revenge they all desired. As the morning slowly arrived, the factory would start up again and the rest of the workers would start to show up. The worker could finally expose Jackie and put all of this behind them. Finally, they could shut down this factory for good and seal that twisted Jackie away within its walls. But as to if that will truly happen is not yet known. But what's known for sure is that the player won't be working here anymore. They just wanted this forsaken factory to be a distant memory. And at the end of the day, that's all this place would become. Just another moment in time for the long story of all these animatronic characters. So I think this would be a pretty interesting sequence for us to finally meet Jackie in The Secret of the Mimic. Not much is known about this character, but I feel like her lurking down in the depths of the factory could be pretty creepy and interesting. She would definitely be an intimidating character, that's for sure. For now, we can't be certain how she'll appear in the final game, and this is one way she might be introduced. But there's only one way to find out for sure. We'll have to wait until we get our hands on FNAF Secret of the Mimic. Alrighty everyone, well that's all we have for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, please consider leaving a like, commenting and subscribing, as it helps a lot and it's greatly appreciated. As always, let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of our version of Jackie and what you'd like to see going forward. Also be sure to comment down all your theories on the overall game and what you think's going to happen as well. But we'd just like to say thank you to everyone who watched today's video, and an even bigger thank you to our Gamerjoob members. The viewership and support from all of you has been so awesome, and we really hope you enjoyed this series. But for now, until our next FNAF character concept video, I'll catch you later, bye.